October 10, 1944, 2:14 a.m., beneath a moonless Pacific sky so black it seemed to swallow the horizon, the USS Tang cut silently through the water at periscope depth, its steel hull gliding like a ghost below the gentle waves as Captain Richard O'Kane leaned over the dim glow of the control-room plotting table, one hand gripping the railing, the other tracing the projected path of a Japanese convoy he knew was somewhere ahead in the vast darkness. The boat thrummed softly under his feet. Men whispered, gauges flickered, pipes rattled faintly in the cold pressurized air, and the submarine breathed like a living creature preparing to strike. O'Kane's eyes, sharp and steady from years of instinct-driven combat, flicked from chart to clock to periscope as he murmured to his executive officer, "They're close. Very close. And they still don't know we're here." Outside, the Pacific stretched endlessly in all directions, a black sheet broken only by faint starlight, masking the submarine as it moved into what would soon become one of the most lethal ambush zones in naval history. The crew of the Tang, hardened by months of relentless patrols, felt the tension tighten through the vessel like a drawn bowstring. Nobody spoke above a whisper, nobody shifted unnecessarily, nobody allowed fear to rise above discipline. They trusted O'Kane, the man whose boldness had already made the Tang a legend whispered through both American and Japanese naval circles. The Tang, sleek and deadly, was the culmination of American submarine warfare evolution. Fast on the surface, agile underwater, devastating with torpedoes once O'Kane perfected the art of close-range night attacks. Tonight, everything about the conditions felt eerily perfect. Calm seas, no moon, barely a breeze, which meant their prey sailed blind, unaware that death was already trailing in their wake. "Surface," O'Kane ordered quietly, and the submarine rose upward with a hiss, breaking the ocean skin without so much as a splash. Fresh night air rushed into the conning tower as O'Kane popped the hatch and climbed up to the bridge, binoculars already raised. He scanned the horizon, slow and methodical, until a faint smear of shadow appeared miles away, too angular to be clouds, too steady to be waves. Ships. Many of them. "Convoy sighted," he whispered into the voice tube, and below him the crew stiffened to action, their exhaustion evaporating as adrenaline spread through the steel corridors. He counted at least 6 merchant ships, perhaps more beyond what the night allowed him to see, escorted by 2 destroyers sweeping their searchlights in lazy arcs across the water, confident in their dominance. They had no reason yet to suspect the Tang. That would change soon enough. O'Kane slipped back down into the control room, where the crew waited for his command with eyes fixed on him like students before a master strategist. "We will run straight in," he said calmly, almost casually, as though discussing a drill and not the kind of attack many submariners considered suicide. But this was his signature move, attacking on the surface, in the dark, at point-blank range, where the submarine behaved more like a nimble torpedo boat than a submersible. It allowed him to strike with precision and vanish before escorts could react. The men nodded, trusting him completely. Engines hummed louder as the Tang surged forward, slicing through black water. On the bridge again, O'Kane watched the convoy grow larger. "Before we continue, please let me know. Did anyone in your family fight in or live through World War II? Share their stories in the comments. Let's continue the story." Clearer, more detailed. The stocky silhouettes of freighters, the sharper lines of destroyers, the scattering of mast lights that marked ships sailing unaware into a killing zone. When the Tang closed to within 900 yards, dangerously close for any submarine, O'Kane gave the order that would define his reputation. "Open torpedo tubes. Fire when ready." Below, in the forward torpedo room, sailors loaded the Mark 18 electric torpedoes with practiced speed, each long silver weapon humming faintly before sliding into its tube. The firing sequence began. Fire 1. A muffled thump. Fire 2. Another thump. Fire 3. Torpedoes streaked through the water, silent and invisible. Moments later, boom. A bright orange blast erupted on the horizon, illuminating the night sky as the first freighter split open. A second explosion followed, Then a third, each strike shaking the ocean like distant thunder. Voices rose from the Japanese ships, chaotic shouts blending with the frantic wail of alarms. Flashlights flickered. Searchlights snapped awake. The convoy plunged into disarray. O'Kane didn't wait. Come about. Prepare aft tubes. The Tang pivoted sharply, her stern swinging into position as O'Kane pressed the attack. Fire 7. Fire 8. 2 more torpedoes sliced into the darkness, and seconds later, another explosion rippled across the sea as a second merchant ship burst into flames. Now the destroyers reacted, racing forward like wolves closing on an unseen enemy, their searchlights stabbing the ocean in desperate sweeps. But the Tang was already slipping into the night, engines roaring softly, wake curling behind her like a serpent's tail. "Where is she?" Japanese commanders shouted into the chaos. "Find the submarine." But the American Predator had melted away, its presence marked only by the burning remains of 2 ships sinking beneath the Pacific. Inside the control room, red lights glowed over the men's faces as they listened to distant explosions and the faint static of enemy communications. O'Kane stood at the plotting table again, calm even as depth charges began detonating miles behind them, each booming echo rolling through the submarine like a dull heartbeat. "They're guessing," he said. "They don't know where we are. We go around and strike again." His officers hesitated, not in doubt, but in awe. No submarine captain in the Pacific fought with such relentless aggression. But that aggression had made the Tang the deadliest submarine Japan had ever faced. And tonight, the hunt was far from over. Hours later, around 4 o'clock, the Tang shadowed the remnants of the convoy from a new angle, using the darkness to mask its approach. The destroyers still swept wildly, chasing phantoms in directions O'Kane had long abandoned. When he surfaced again, the sea breeze carried the heavy scent of burning oil and drifting debris. "They're wounded," O'Kane murmured. "Struggling. That's when predators strike." Once more the Tang closed in, this time within 700 yards, before unleashing another torpedo spread. The explosions arrived almost simultaneously, tearing apart yet another freighter and sending a cascade of sparks into the sky like fireworks of destruction. Terrified Japanese sailors leapt overboard, shouting, their voices carried faintly across the water. The destroyers turned, but too late. The Tang submerged instantly, slipping beneath the surface like a ghost dissolving into the night, her silent retreat leaving nothing but panic in her wake. By dawn, the Pacific was calm again, the smoke drifting gently over the remnants of ships that had once carried supplies vital to Japan's survival. In the dim morning light, the Tang cruised deep underwater, safe and entirely undetected, while the crew allowed themselves brief moments of rest. Some leaned back against the steel walls with eyes closed, listening to the hum of engines. Others cleaned equipment or scribbled notes in small journals. In the galley, sailors whispered about the night's unbelievable success, calling O'Kane a genius, a madman, a savior, a legend. And in the control room, the captain simply stood in silence, gripping the railing as he studied the shifting dials and gauges. His mind never rested, not after a victory, not after a near encounter, not even after sinking more tonnage in one night than some entire submarines achieved in their entire service. He knew Japan would adapt. He knew each attack made them more desperate, more dangerous. And he knew he would face that danger again, because the Tang was no ordinary submarine, and he was no ordinary captain. The Pacific War was tightening. Supplies were failing. Japan was bleeding from every direction. And in the deep, endless ocean, one American predator moved unseen, unheard, unmatched, the submarine Japan never detected, and the captain whose tactics would change naval warfare forever. October 14, 1944, 1:27 a.m., beneath a sky veiled by thick Pacific mist that dimmed even the brightest stars, The USS Tang cruised silently through deep black waters southwest of Formosa, her crew tense and alert as Captain Richard O'Kane studied enemy radio transmissions intercepted earlier that evening, transmissions that hinted at a new Japanese convoy moving through the area, faster, tighter, more heavily guarded than the one they had shattered days before. In the dim red glow of the control room, O'Kane's face appeared carved in shadow, his jaw set as he traced projected coordinates across a parchment chart, the soft rasp of pencil on paper sounding almost thunderous in the stillness. Around him, his officers waited with bated breath, sensing that their captain's intuition, so often uncanny, was locking onto something big, something dangerous, something worth risking everything for. "They know we're out here," O'Kane murmured. "But they still have to move supplies. Desperation forces mistakes." His executive officer nodded, tightening his grip on the chart table's edge as the submarine shifted slightly with the current. The Pacific at night could feel endless, empty, and silent, but to O'Kane its emptiness was full of clues, patterns of shipping routes, probabilities of movement, habits of convoys, and the inevitable arrogance of Japanese commanders who still underestimated American submarines. "We head north," O'Kane ordered softly. "1 hour on the surface. Keep everything quiet. We intercept at dawn." The boat tilted as ballast adjusted, and moments later the sub rose toward the surface, breaking through the night with barely a ripple. On the bridge, the cold sea air struck O'Kane's face as he swept binoculars across a horizon barely visible through drifting fog. The ocean was hauntingly still, a mirror of black glass stretching into infinity, broken only by faint crests of white foam. But O'Kane wasn't fooled by stillness. The Pacific often lay calmest right before danger revealed itself. He turned to the officer beside him. "If this convoy is what I think it is," he said quietly, "they're carrying fuel and ammunition. High-value cargo means heavy protection." Heavy protection meant new challenges. Destroyers with advanced sonar, patrol boats running unpredictable zigzag patterns, and pilots trained to spot wakes in the dark. The crew below understood all of that too. In the engine room, machinists whispered about the coming hunt while tuning the diesels, making sure every bolt was snug, every instrument calibrated. In the torpedo room, sailors polished Mark 23 steam torpedoes until they gleamed under the low lamps, checking firing pins, adjusting gyroscopes, rehearsing launch procedures. Even in the cramped bunks, off-duty sailors slept lightly, their bodies conditioned by months of combat to wake instantly at the faintest shift in the submarine's rhythm. Deep down, the men trusted their captain with a rare kind of devotion, born from victories he'd carved out of situations other commanders would have called impossible. At 3:10 a.m., O'Kane's instincts proved correct. A faint silhouette appeared on the horizon, then another and another, barely visible through the mist but unmistakable in formation. "Convoy," O'Kane whispered. Below, the alarm bell struck once, not the frantic clang of battle stations, but the singular, heavy chime that meant every man needed to be ready. The Tang dropped back to periscope depth, sliding beneath the surface with fluid grace, the sound of the ocean closing overhead muffling into a deep, steady hush. Through the periscope, O'Kane could now see clearer, at least 8 merchant ships, escorted by 3 destroyers patrolling in a protective triangle. Their wakes glowed faintly in the moonlight. Their engines droned through the water in steady pulses. They moved fast, but not fast enough to outrun an American submarine positioned perfectly ahead of their path. "Plot an intercept course," O'Kane said, and the crew sprang into action, calling out bearings, adjusting trim, turning dials and wheels as the submarine angled toward its new prey. Minutes passed like hours as the Tang moved silently into attack position. The destroyers remained unaware, their sonar sweeps gliding harmlessly across long ranges where the submarine had already slipped away. O'Kane waited until the convoy drew closer, counting the shapes through the periscope: oil tanker, freighter, ammunition ship, each more valuable than the last. "Range 1,800 yards, he whispered. "We'll cut it to 900. The executive officer inhaled sharply. It was a dangerous approach, but O'Kane believed in precision over caution. The Tang crept closer, closer still, until the merchant ship's engines vibrated faintly through the hull. At 900 yards, O'Kane locked onto the largest ship, a tanker heavy with fuel. "Fire one," he ordered. The torpedo shot free with a muted thump. "Fire two." "Fire three." 3 torpedoes raced through the dark water, invisible to all but the most sensitive sonar. Seconds later, an eruption of flame. The tanker split open in a roar, flames bursting upward in a blinding pillar that turned the fog orange and red. Burning oil spilled across the surface, spreading like molten fire. The convoy panicked. Japanese destroyers immediately turned toward the explosion, searchlights snapping to life as they swept the waves in frantic arcs, shouting orders echoing through megaphones. But O'Kane was prepared for chaos. "Dive to 150 feet," he ordered. "Right full rudder. Keep quiet." The Tang descended, the steel hull creaking softly as pressure increased. A low hum rolled through the vessel as the destroyers began their counterattack. The first depth charge detonated far away, a distant thud. The second was closer. The third shook the submarine enough to make dust fall from pipe fittings overhead. Men held their breath, waiting for the next explosion, but it never came. The destroyers had misjudged the Tang's position. They were bombing empty ocean. O'Kane leaned toward the sonar operator. "Track the escorts. They'll regroup. We'll strike again." And strike again they did. An hour later, after surfacing on a new heading, the Tang bore down on the convoy's rear ships. Flames from the earlier attack still glowed faintly on the horizon, guiding their approach like a beacon. This time O'Kane targeted a freighter hauling ammunition. The torpedo hit so hard the sound echoed through the submarine's hull like a drumbeat. The ship erupted in a chain of explosions, fire climbing its masts before the entire vessel disintegrated into a shower of sparks and debris. Men on nearby ships screamed warnings. Sailors rushed to cut lifeboats loose. But the submarine had already vanished again beneath the surface. By sunrise, the Pacific was littered with burning oil slicks, scattered wreckage, and stunned survivors clinging to debris. Japanese destroyers circled helplessly, unable to find the submarine that had torn through their formation with terrifying precision. In the dim morning light, the Tang cruised deep underwater, engines quiet, crew exhausted but exhilarated. They gathered in the mess room, retelling the night's events in hushed, awe-filled tones. "Captain O'Kane doesn't hunt convoys," one sailor whispered. "He dismantles them." Another chuckled softly. "Japan won't sleep easy tonight." But O'Kane wasn't celebrating. In the control room, he stared at the Pacific chart spread before him, pencil in hand, eyes narrowed with thought. The war in the Pacific was shifting rapidly. Japan was tightening its defenses, sending more destroyers, more aircraft, more patrols. Their desperation made them unpredictable. But unpredictability didn't scare him. It inspired him. The Tang's mission was far from over, and O'Kane knew that every ship he sank made Japan weaker and brought the war one step closer to its end. As the submarine glided deeper into the ocean, its hull humming softly, O'Kane smoothed the chart with one hand and whispered, "We hunt again tonight." And somewhere beyond the horizon, another Japanese convoy steamed unknowingly toward the silent predator that would soon change their fate. October 14, 1944, 18:42 p.m., as the last streaks of red sun faded beneath a horizon stained by smoke from burning vessels the USS Tang had sunk earlier, Captain Richard O'Kane stood on the periscope platform in the dimly lit control room. His fingers resting lightly on the metal handles as he watched the distant silhouettes of Japanese destroyers still searching the waters where they believed the American submarine must be hiding, unaware that the Tang was already miles away, repositioning. for another devastating strike. The control room hummed with quiet intensity, the air thick with sweat, tension, and the low vibration of machinery as the crew moved with disciplined precision, their faces illuminated by the soft glow of gauges and red lamps. O'Kane lowered the periscope slightly and murmured, "They're running scared, but fear won't stop them from regrouping." His executive officer nodded, wiping condensation from the edge of the plotting table as he traced possible convoy escape routes. The Japanese ships were panicking, yes, but panic could make them unpredictable, and unpredictability in these waters could be deadly. The ocean had become a hunting ground, but one where the hunter could easily become the hunted if even a single miscalculation occurred. The Mark 18 torpedoes were being checked and rechecked in the forward torpedo room, each sailor running hands along the metal casings, adjusting gyro settings, making sure nothing, absolutely nothing, was out of place. Sweat dripped down foreheads despite the cold seep of ocean temperature creeping through the steel walls. The strain of battle lingered like a ghost in every corner of the submarine. O'Kane stepped away from the periscope and listened as sonar reported faint screw noises. Slow, heavy, rhythmic. "Convoy still retreating," the operator whispered. "Heading northeast, maybe trying to reach the Taiwan Strait." O'Kane's eyes narrowed. "They're limping," he said. "We broke their line. Now we finish the job." The submarine turned in a wide arc, engines humming low, slipping through layers of thermocline that helped distort Japanese sonar. The Tang's crew felt the familiar shift of weight as the vessel angled deeper, the floor tilting slightly beneath their boots as they descended silently. In the galley, sailors grabbed onto rails to steady themselves while they continued preparing a simple meal: coffee, tinned meat, hard biscuits, but no one had much appetite. The sea around them felt charged with danger, as though unseen hands were stirring the waters in expectation of violence to come. At 20:12 p.m., the sonar operator stiffened, raising a hand for silence. Multiple screws. Fast. Closing distance. O'Kane leaned in. "Destroyers." A moment passed, the sonar's rhythmic pings filling the tense room. "No, sir," the operator finally answered. "Merchant ships. Large. They're fleeing right toward us." A slow smile crossed O'Kane's face. The convoy was stumbling straight into his trap. "Perfect," he whispered. "Battle stations." In an instant, alarms blared softly, muted for stealth, but loud enough that every man aboard froze, reacted, and moved. Sailors sprinted through narrow corridors, sliding into positions they had rehearsed countless times. Torpedo doors were flooded. Gyros were locked. Depth gauges were watched with unwavering eyes. In the aft torpedo room, sailors steadied themselves as the sub leveled out, their faces pale but resolute. O'Kane made his way back to the periscope. When he raised it again, the ocean surface appeared in eerie silver-blue reflection under a thin crescent moon, the silhouettes of enemy vessels dark against the glowing horizon. They were closer than he expected, panicked, disorganized, and vulnerable. He waited, timing their movement like a conductor anticipating the exact moment to lift his baton. "Range 1,200 yards, he said evenly. "Angle on bow. Perfect." He lowered his voice. "Fire one." The torpedo lunged into the water with a muffled hiss. "Fire two." Another. "Fire three." He watched each torpedo streak toward the nearest freighter, and then, 36 seconds later, an impact that lit the night with a blinding flash. The ship convulsed, flames bursting from its midsection as coal dust and ammunition ignited in a thunderous eruption. Through the periscope, O'Kane watched the vessel break apart, its bow rising in a desperate arc before slipping beneath the waves. Before the explosion's echo faded, he had already selected his next target. Number 2 freighter. Fire 4. Another torpedo streaked into the dark, hitting dead center. A second explosion tore across the water, rippling with shock waves that vibrated faintly through the Tang's hull. But this time, the convoy reacted faster. Japanese destroyers pivoted sharply, their searchlights slicing across the dark waters as they accelerated toward the explosion site. O'Kane dropped the periscope instantly. "Dive to 200 feet," he commanded. The Tang slid downward, the pressure growing heavier, the hull groaning as depth increased. Moments later, the first depth charge detonated above them, a low, rumbling boom that shook dust from overhead pipes. Then came another, closer, and another. The lights flickered. Sonar echoed violently. Men gripped rails as explosions hammered the surrounding water. Yet O'Kane remained still, his voice calm. "Hold depth. Hold course." The destroyers swept back and forth above, releasing volleys of depth charges that sent towering curtains of bubbles cascading downward like underwater thunderclouds. But the Tang had already shifted position again, slipping through a silent underwater pocket where sonar waves bent harmlessly. Minutes dragged into nearly an hour before the explosions began to fade, the destroyers tiring, confused by the lack of wreckage, the ocean's silence mocking their efforts. O'Kane finally exhaled. "They think we fled west," he said. "But we're going east." The submarine angled upward slightly, moving toward the convoy's original track, toward more ships that were now defenseless. At 23:02 p.m., the Tang rose to periscope depth again. The ocean was quieter now, lit only by the faint orange glow of burning debris in the far distance. But large shadows still moved, slow, desperate, unaware that death pursued them. O'Kane selected a lone tanker falling behind the others, likely hit earlier or struggling with engine trouble. It was a perfect target, and he knew destroying it would cripple Japan's remaining fuel reserves even further. He steadied his breathing. Range 900 yards. Fire 1. The torpedo sped forth, and the tanker's fuel tanks erupted in a spectacular inferno, fire shooting skyward like a volcanic eruption. The explosion's rumble vibrated through the Tang like distant thunder. Another victory. Another wound inflicted on an empire already bleeding from 1,000 cuts. As the Tang slipped away again, O'Kane allowed himself a rare moment of reflection. He thought of the war's shifting tides, the American carriers dominating the skies, the Marines pushing across island after island, the Japanese empire slowly constricting like a dying star. Submarines like the Tang were accelerating that collapse, tearing apart supply lines faster than Japan could repair them. But victory was never guaranteed. Every attack risked everything. Every torpedo could be their last. Still, as the USS Tang glided through the silent deep Pacific in the early hours of October 15th, her crew exhausted but triumphant, O'Kane whispered a quiet vow into the dimly lit control room. "We will not stop. Not tonight. Not ever. Not until the ocean itself is free of this war." And somewhere beyond the horizon, another convoy steamed blindly into the night, unaware that the most feared submarine in the Pacific was already tracking their course. October 15th, 1944, 1:27 a.m., as a pale mist settled over the moonlit Pacific and the USS Tang cruised beneath the surface like a steel shadow moving through the endless dark, Captain Richard O'Kane stood once again in the low light of the control room, his expression focused, his mind calculating every mile ahead, every risk, every opportunity that the night still held. Hours of battle had passed, yet exhaustion had no place aboard the Tang. The submarine and her crew remained sharp, disciplined, driven by the knowledge that every Japanese vessel sunk tightened the noose around an empire desperate to maintain supply lines across a collapsing Pacific front. The sonar operator's headphones crackled with faint echoes as he leaned closer, adjusting dials with trembling fingers. "New contact," he muttered. "Bearing 210, slow-moving, large displacement." O'Kane's eyes narrowed. A survivor of the earlier ambush? Or another straggler attempting to regroup? Either way, The ocean had offered them another target, and the Tang did not waste opportunities. The submarine angled silently toward the sound, slipping between layers of deep, cold currents that masked engine noise and distorted sonar detection. The men in the torpedo rooms checked their remaining Mark 18 torpedoes, less than a full spread now, but enough to kill again if used with the precision O'Kane demanded. At 1:42 a.m., the Tang rose toward periscope depth, the quiet hum of ballast adjustments reverberating through the metal hull. The periscope broke through the surface with barely a ripple, and O'Kane's breath fogged the eyepiece as he scanned the horizon. At first, there was only darkness layered on darkness, but then he saw it, a faint silhouette gliding slowly across the dim water, a Japanese transport struggling to escape the slaughtered convoy. Smoke drifted from its aft section, a sign of earlier damage, but its engines still churned desperately, trying to outrun a fate it could not see. The ship was wounded, isolated, and unaware that the Tang had already locked onto it. O'Kane spoke softly. Range 1,100 yards, broadside angle, beautiful. He lowered the periscope, his voice steady. Battle stations. The whisper of movement exploded into coordinated action as the crew assumed their positions, their boots thumping lightly on steel floors, their hands gripping levers and valves with the confidence of men who had performed these actions hundreds of times yet understood that one mistake, even one, could mean their deaths. "Flood tubes 1 and 2, O'Kane ordered. Water rushed into the forward torpedo tubes, displacing air in a low, gurgling roar. The submarine's bow settled slightly from the shifting weight. Tube 1, fire. The torpedo shot forward, leaving behind a thin stream of bubbles that dispersed quickly in the dark water. Tube 2, fire. Another streak of silent destruction followed. 30 seconds later, the ocean erupted in a towering plume of fire and steel as the wounded ship split open under the dual impact. Through the periscope, O'Kane watched flames engulf the deck, casting flickering orange reflections across the water. Men scrambled, shouting, running, tiny silhouettes illuminated by the inferno. The ship sank bow first, swallowed by the sea with a final hiss of steam. "Another one down," murmured the XO, but O'Kane did not smile. The weight of war pressed heavily on those who killed, even when justified. He lowered the periscope slowly. "Prepare to dive. Destroyers will be coming." As if summoned by the sinking, new sonar echoes rippled across the headphones just minutes later. Fast, sharp, aggressive. "Destroyers inbound," the operator called out. The tension in the control room snapped taut as O'Kane issued the command. "Take her down. 250 feet." The Tang descended quickly, the hull creaking as pressure mounted. Red lights flickered as engineers monitored the dive planes, adjusting them with precise movements. Above, the first depth charges detonated, sending a violent tremor down through the water. The submarine shook hard, loose tools rattling in drawers, coffee splashing from tin cups. Another explosion. Closer. Then another. The men braced themselves, jaws clenched, hands gripping whatever they could as the ocean roared around them like a collapsing cavern. One particularly close blast threw a shower of dust from the overhead seams. For a few seconds, the lights dimmed dangerously, flickering as if unsure whether to stay alive. But the Tang held. She always held. O'Kane waited, motionless, counting the seconds between explosions. Depth charges were patterns. If you understood the rhythm, you could predict the chaos. When the pattern shifted, he knew the destroyers had altered course. "Helm, turn starboard 15 degrees, he whispered. "Steady as she goes." The submarine glided horizontally through the dark, weaving between underwater ridges the Japanese did not know existed. As the destroyers circled overhead, dropping charges in frantic spreads, the Tang used the terrain to mask her escape, sliding beneath a thermocline layer that scattered sonar beams like broken glass. One by one, The distant booms grew fainter until finally, after nearly 40 agonizing minutes, they ceased altogether. The silence that followed felt immense. If you already watched till this part, so please comment below your city name. Let's continue the story. Men slumped back against bulkheads, breathing deeply, sweat dripping down their foreheads. Some exchanged shaky smiles, others quietly stared at the floor, absorbing the magnitude of what they had just survived. O'Kane remained standing, his expression solemn, his voice calm. "Good work, men. But tonight isn't over." For even as the destroyers pulled away, thinking they had finished sweeping the kill zone, O'Kane knew there were still Japanese convoys fleeing through the Pacific. Convoys that needed to be hunted, intercepted, destroyed. At 3:11 a.m., after carefully rising to periscope depth and confirming the waters were clear, the Tang surfaced to recharge batteries. The night air was cold and damp, carrying the faint scent of burning oil from the distant wreckage. Men climbed onto the deck for fresh air, staring across the vast emptiness of the sea. Stars glimmered above them despite the drifting smoke. For a brief moment, the war felt far away. But the illusion lasted only as long as the wind stayed still. Soon, the sound of distant aircraft engines echoed faintly through the night. Japanese patrol planes searching for survivors or attackers. "Crash dive," O'Kane ordered. The deck crew scrambled back through the hatch. Seawater splashed over the bow as the Tang plunged below the surface again. Within seconds, the submarine was gone, swallowed by the depths, invisible once more. The patrol aircraft passed overhead, sweeping searchlights uselessly across empty waves. Deep below, the Tang leveled out again, and O'Kane returned to the plotting table. He traced the convoy's predicted route, tapping a point along the map. "They're heading toward Formosa," he said. "We intercept here." The XO nodded, eyes heavy with fatigue but fire still burning behind them. "Captain, do we have enough torpedoes for another attack?" O'Kane paused. 5 left. The XO exhaled. 5. O'Kane looked at the glowing red lights of the torpedo status board. 5 is enough, he said. "If every shot counts." Silence settled again, a thick, almost sacred stillness that accompanied submarines between battles. But in the hearts of the men aboard, adrenaline and resolve continued to pulse. They knew they were part of something larger than themselves, part of a campaign slicing through Japan's lifelines, sinking its supplies, crippling its logistics, suffocating its navy. The Tang was more than a machine. It was a blade of the United States Navy, honed to perfection, wielded by a captain whose instincts bordered on supernatural. And somewhere out there, just beyond the horizon of sonar detection, another group of Japanese ships steamed onward, unaware that fate, silent, patient, and deadly, was already tracking them from below. October 15, 1944, 17:56 p.m., as the Pacific sky darkened into a molten red haze and distant clouds glowed faintly with the last reflections of burning ships, the USS Tang sliced through the ocean at periscope depth, her engines running at a low, predatory hum while Captain Richard O'Kane studied the map table illuminated by a single dull lamp. Hours had passed since their last attack, but the intensity of battle had not faded. It clung to the men like salt to their skin, a reminder that every moment of quiet was only the calm before another pursuit, another torpedo run, another brush with death. The sonar operator suddenly stiffened, pressing his headphones tighter. "Captain, new contacts. Multiple screw signatures. Bearing 075. Closing." O'Kane lifted his head slowly, eyes sharpening like a hawk catching movement across a field. "Convoy?" he asked. "Most likely," the operator whispered. "Large, staggered speed, maybe damaged vessels regrouping." O'Kane stepped toward the periscope, adjusting the handles with practiced finesse, the metal cold beneath his fingers. He raised the scope above the waves, droplets sliding down the lens as the vast, dark ocean slowly resolved into shapes. First nothing but shadows, then faint silhouettes, then clearer forms. 2 freighters limping forward, escorted by a single Japanese destroyer whose stern still smoked from earlier explosions. These were survivors, determined, battered, fleeing toward safety they would never reach if the Tang had anything to say about it. The control room tightened around the moment. Every man felt it. This was the hunt, the purpose, the reason the Tang existed. O'Kane whispered, "They think they escaped. They didn't." He lowered the scope and turned to his men. Battle stations. The submarine filled with movement. Soft thudding boots, the clank of valves, whispered commands. Torpedo tubes were checked with ritual precision. The Tang angled slightly starboard, slicing into a new intercept course with the silent confidence of a creature born to the deep. The destroyer ahead moved sluggishly, as if unaware danger stalked beneath the surface, its crew likely exhausted, half-blind from smoke and shock. But even a crippled destroyer was deadly. One lucky depth charge pattern, one successful sonar ping, one mistake from the Tang could turn Hunter into wreckage. O'Kane breathed slowly, lowering himself over the periscope again. Range 3,000 yards. We can close to 1,500 before they notice. The submarine drifted closer, water hissing quietly around the hull as it stalked the survivors. At 19:04 p.m., the moment arrived. "Flood tubes 1 and 2, O'Kane commanded. Water surged. Pressure equalized. The torpedo men braced themselves. O'Kane whispered, "Steady, steady." The destroyer shifted slightly in the waves, its silhouette crossing precisely into firing angle. "Fire 1." A brief hiss. "Fire 2." Another. The torpedoes raced outward beneath the ocean like streaks of caged thunder finally released. Half a minute later, the sea lit up purple-orange as the destroyer exploded, its stern disintegrating in a violent spray of metal, water, and fire. Men aboard the dying vessel scrambled into the inferno, but the ship was doomed. It folded inward, split, and vanished beneath boiling water within seconds. But the battle was far from over. The 2 freighters accelerated, fear driving their engines harder than oil ever could. Their decks were chaotic, crew shouting orders, spotlights flashing wildly across the waves, searching for an attacker they could not see. O'Kane pivoted the Tang toward them, heart steady, eyes cold. "We end this," he said. "Tonight." He selected the lead freighter, a heavy transport carrying supplies Japan desperately needed to continue defending its shrinking Pacific territory. Range 1,800 yards. Tube 3. He inhaled deeply. Fire! The torpedo launched cleanly, and struck dead center beneath the ship's cargo hold. The explosion tore upward, splitting the deck open. Flames leapt skyward, lighting the night like a burning cathedral. The freighter tilted sharply, its massive hull groaning as seawater flooded in. It sank bow first, slipping beneath the surface with a final, echoing moan of collapsing steel. Yet the second freighter did not run. Instead, to O'Kane's astonishment, it turned, slowly, painfully, directly toward the site of the attack, as if trying to ram the submarine it could not see. "Brave," O'Kane murmured. "Foolish, but brave." He repositioned the Tang, circling beneath the ship's blind spot. Tube 4, fire. The torpedo struck near the engine room, and the ship convulsed violently, flames erupting through shattered portholes. The vessel buckled, then rolled onto its side, sinking in a whirlpool of smoke and steam. Silence returned, a heavy, almost sacred silence. But O'Kane did not smile. He listened to the crackling sonar headset now picking up something new. Not ships, not destroyers, but the distant rumble of aircraft engines. Japanese patrol planes were arriving. "We dive," he said. "Now." The Tang descended beneath the surface moments before searchlights swept the area. Bombs splashed harmlessly into the ocean, exploding far above the submarine's depth. O'Kane stood quietly in the control room, feeling the vibrations drift away. The Tang had escaped once again. Hours later, after the danger passed, the submarine surfaced to recharge batteries. Moonlight shimmered across gentle swells. The air was cool, still, strangely peaceful. Some crewmen emerged onto the deck, breathing deeply, staring at the stars. They had survived another day, another battle, another series of impossibly precise attacks. The Tang had become a ghost in the Pacific, unseen, unstoppable, unmatched. But O'Kane knew the night was not finished with them. His instincts, honed through years of combat, warned that the ocean always demanded a price for success. And somewhere in the dark below, a torpedo malfunction, a sonar miscalculation, or a single enemy ambush could turn triumph into tragedy. Still, as the Tang glided under starlight, engines humming like a predator's heartbeat, O'Kane remained resolute. "Tomorrow," he whispered to the wind, "we hunt again." The Pacific, vast and unforgiving, carried his words into the darkness, toward the final chapter that awaited the Tang and her legendary crew. October 25, 1944, 2:17 a.m., beneath a moonless sky so dark it seemed to swallow the horizon whole, the USS Tang moved quietly across the Luzon Strait, her engines pulsing with the deep, rhythmic thrum of a seasoned predator returning from another night of destruction. Captain Richard O'Kane stood on the bridge, the wind brushing across his face as he watched faint clouds drifting low over black water that shimmered with subtle reflections of starlight. The crew below him worked in practiced silence, exhausted yet proud. Another convoy destroyed, another Japanese supply line severed, another night where the Tang had struck with uncanny precision and vanished into the depths before enemy forces could react. No submarine in the U.S. Navy held a record like Tang's. More ships sunk per patrol, more daring attacks, more night engagements that defied doctrine and probability alike. But this night, this return transit, held a different energy, a slight tension beneath the quiet, like a faint vibration in the air before a storm breaks. The Pacific War was reaching a fever pitch, Japan collapsing on all fronts, American fleets advancing like a steel tide, and submarines like Tang were tightening the noose with every torpedo fired. Yet success had made the Tang bold, perhaps too bold for the danger that lurked ahead. At 2:26 a.m., radar detected a cluster of echoes, another Japanese convoy attempting a desperate nocturnal run to resupply troops clinging to shattered island strongholds. O'Kane lowered his binoculars and spoke 4 words that every man aboard had come to expect. "We attack at once." The submarine dove smoothly, seawater roaring past the hull as Tang slipped beneath the waves, her interior dimming under red battle lighting. O'Kane stood at the periscope, eyes narrow, calculating distances and speeds with the instinct of a master hunter. 3 transports, 1 escort. "Ideal," he whispered. The Tang approached the convoy with astonishing speed, surfacing briefly to conduct a surface attack, O'Kane's signature tactic, one that maximized speed, accuracy, and surprise. At firing range, Tang unleashed a spread of torpedoes that streaked across the water like glowing phantoms. 2 found their mark. The first transport erupted in a violent sphere of flame, illuminating the night as men flung themselves from the deck. The second transport buckled inward, split in half, and sank within minutes. The escort destroyer panicked, turning blindly, its searchlights stabbing across empty waves as O'Kane maneuvered Tang into a new firing position. Another torpedo fired. Another explosion. 3 kills in minutes. A perfect attack. But perfection carries risk. As Tang began to circle for a second run, O'Kane ordered 2 more torpedoes fired at the last surviving escort ship. Tube 10 fired cleanly, the torpedo streaking away into the dark. Tube 11 fired, but something was wrong. The torpedo exited the tube, hesitated, just for a heartbeat, and then curved sharply, veering not toward the enemy but back toward the Tang herself in a deadly arc. The sonar operator stiffened, eyes widening. "Sir, that's our torpedo." O'Kane froze. His mind raced. Only one command made sense, but it was too late. "All back, emergency!" Men scrambled, engines roared, the submarine lurched, but the Pacific held no mercy. The rogue torpedo slammed into Tang's stern with a deafening blast that shook the hull like a struck bell. Lights flickered. Machinery shrieked. Water burst through ruptured seams in a cold, violent surge. Men were thrown against bulkheads. The submarine listed, groaned, and began sinking stern-first toward the abyss. Chaos swallowed the control room. Steam hissed from broken valves. Alarms wailed. Water surged so fast through the aft compartments that men barely had time to shout before the ocean claimed them. O'Kane, stunned but conscious, dragged himself up by a rail, shouting orders through the darkness. "Seal the aft compartments. Blow ballast. Fight the list." But the Tang was dying, wounded not by an enemy, but by her own weapon, a cruel twist of fate that no training manual had ever imagined. Still, the crew fought with everything they had, slamming doors, turning valves, bracing bulkheads, trying desperately to halt the descending tilt of the submarine. For a moment, the Tang stabilized at 180 feet, suspended in the blackness like a wounded animal refusing to fall. But more water poured in. Steel creaked. The stern groaned under monstrous pressure. The submarine dipped again, 200 feet, 220, 240, creeping toward the crushing depths. O'Kane made the hardest call of his career. Prepare to abandon ship. But how? They were trapped inside a wounded submarine, deep underwater, with only one possible escape route. The forward escape trunk, the narrow metal chamber that could only hold a few men at a time and required them to ascend through freezing, pressurized black water to reach the surface. The crew gathered, some injured, some in shock, all staring at their captain, whom they trusted more than any man alive. O'Kane looked at them, not as a commander, but as a brother in arms. "Listen to me," he said quietly. "We are not done. Not tonight. Not here. We're going home. One way or another, we're going home." He oversaw the first escape group, 6 men, scared but resolute, as they climbed into the escape trunk. The hatch sealed. Pressure equalized. The chamber flooded. Then the upper hatch released, and the men shot upward into the dark ocean. One survived. The second group prepared. Then another. Men prayed, trembled, cried, clenched fists, each knowing that ascent meant either life or death, with no middle ground. One by one, they climbed into the chamber and were launched upward into the unknown. Some made it. Many did not. Depth, pressure, darkness, exhaustion, these were the enemies now. Not Japan. Not destroyers. Not aircraft. But the ocean itself. O'Kane supervised the final escapes, insisting he would be the last to leave. When his turn finally came, he climbed into the escape trunk, sealing the hatch behind him. The chamber filled with icy water. He held his breath, braced himself, and pushed through the upper hatch, ascending alone through a column of blackness that seemed endless. His lungs screamed. His chest burned. His vision blurred. But he forced himself upward, kicking with the strength of a man who refused to die. And then, breaking the surface with a desperate gasp, he discovered he was not alone. A handful of survivors floated nearby, clinging to wreckage beneath starlight. But their ordeal was not over. Before dawn broke, a Japanese patrol vessel captured them. For the remaining months of the war, O'Kane and his surviving crew endured imprisonment, starvation, interrogation, isolation, but even in captivity, They carried themselves with the quiet pride of men who had stood among the greatest submarine crews in history. When Japan surrendered in August 1945, the survivors were liberated. Thin, worn, scarred, but alive. As O'Kane returned to American soil, he walked with the weight of memory, of friends lost, of battles won, of a submarine that had become a legend beneath the waves. The Tang's record would never be matched. Her victories shaped the Pacific War. Her captain became one of the most decorated officers in naval history, and her final patrol, tragic, heroic, unforgettable, became a story told not in whispers, but in reverence. Today, the USS Tang rests somewhere in the cold darkness of the Pacific, her steel hull silent, her once deadly torpedo tubes forever still. But the ocean remembers. History remembers. And every submarine crew that sails into danger carries with them a piece of Tang's legacy, the legacy of a predator so skilled, so fearless, so brilliantly commanded that Japan never detected her until the very end. Her war ended in darkness. Her story did not. If you found this story compelling, please take a moment to like this video. It helps us share more forgotten stories from the Second World War. Subscribe to stay connected with these untold histories. Each one matters. Each one deserves to be remembered, and we would love to hear from you. Leave a comment below telling us where you are watching from. Our community spans from Texas to Tasmania, from veterans to history enthusiasts. You are part of something special here. Thank you for watching, and thank you for keeping these stories alive.